The rain fell in a solid, impenetrable curtain, turning the winding country road into a slick, black ribbon. Exhaustion weighed on Sofia's eyelids. After a grueling 12-hour shift in the emergency room, all she wanted was the warmth of her small apartment, a cup of tea, and blessed, silent sleep. Her headlights cut a lonely path through the darkness. Then they caught something. A figure, staggering at the edge of the road, a dark shape against the violent chaos of the storm. A man. He was clutching his side, his body hunched in pain. As her car approached, he stumbled and fell to his knees in the mud. Sofia slammed on the brakes, her heart leaping into her throat. The car skidded to a halt just feet from him. Every safety warning she had ever heard screamed in her mind. Don't stop. Keep driving. It's a trap. You're a woman, alone, in the middle of nowhere. But then she looked again. Through the sweeping arc of her windshield wipers, she saw the dark, spreading stain on his shirt. Blood. Her nurse's instincts, a force more powerful than any fear, took over. She threw the car in park, grabbed the small first aid kit she always kept in her passenger seat, and ran out into the torrential downpour. She approached him cautiously. "Sir, are you all right?" He looked up, and even in the dim, rainy light, his face was striking. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, and intense, dark eyes that held a surprising lucidity despite his obvious pain. He was soaked to the bone, mud clinging to his expensive-looking suit. He didn't look like someone who belonged on the side of a deserted road. "Please," he rasped, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "No. Hospital. No police." That should have been it. The giant, flashing red sign for her to get back in her car and drive away as fast as she could. But there was something in his eyes. Not a threat, but a raw, desperate plea. "You're bleeding heavily," she said, her professional instincts taking over as she knelt beside him, ignoring the cold mud seeping through her scrubs. "I'm a nurse. Let me see." He tried to resist, a weak push of her hands, but he was too weak. She gently lifted his shirt. A deep, ugly gash sliced across his abdomen, bleeding sluggishly. It needed stitches. Badly. "You need a hospital," she insisted, her voice firm. "Please," he repeated, his hand gripping her arm with a surprising strength. "If you take me to a hospital, they will find me." He paused, his gaze intense. "And you will be in danger too." Sofia froze, the weight of his words sinking in. This was more than a car accident. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous. She looked at his face, at the vulnerability hidden beneath the hard lines of his features, at the genuine fear in his eyes. And she made a decision that defied all logic, all reason. "My apartment is 10 minutes from here," she said, her own voice surprising her with its calm resolve. "I have medical supplies at home. I can stitch you up there." He stared at her, a look of profound, disbelieving shock on his face. She helped him to his feet, his arm draped over her shoulder, his body heavy against hers. As she guided him into the passenger seat of her small, reliable car, he passed out, his head slumping against the window. During the short, tense drive, illuminated by flashes of lightning, she kept glancing at his face in the rearview mirror. He looked vaguely familiar. Maybe she'd seen him in a newspaper or on the local news. But she was too tired, too focused on keeping him alive, to place him. Getting him up the 2 flights of stairs to her apartment was a feat of almost superhuman effort. She half-dragged, half-carried him, finally managing to get him onto her small sofa. As she rushed to get her supplies, he stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "What's your name?" she asked, kneeling beside him, her hands already working, cleaning the wound with antiseptic. He hesitated, his gaze cloudy with pain. "Anthony," he finally rasped. "Just Anthony." Sofia nodded, her focus entirely on the task at hand. "Okay, Anthony, this is going to hurt." She began to stitch the wound, her movements quick and precise. He gritted his teeth, his body rigid with pain, but he didn't make a sound. His self-control was almost supernatural. When she had finished, her own body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline, he looked at her, his eyes clearer now. "Why?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Why did you help me?" Sofia met his intense gaze and gave the only answer she had. "Because you needed it." A flicker of something she couldn't decipher passed across his face. Shock, gratitude, maybe something deeper. Then, his eyes rolled back, and he finally succumbed to the darkness, passing out completely on her sofa. And Sofia was left alone in the quiet of her apartment, the storm raging outside, with the sudden, terrifying realization that she had just brought a dangerous, bleeding stranger into the heart of her home. Sofia woke with a start, a crick in her neck from where her head had slumped against the arm of the sofa. The storm had passed, and a weak, gray morning light was filtering through her window. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then, she felt it. The distinct, unnerving sensation of being watched. She slowly opened her eyes. Anthony was awake. He was no longer on the sofa where she had left him, but was sitting in the worn armchair opposite, his posture stiff with pain, but his gaze sharp and alert. He was studying her and her small, tidy apartment with a quiet, disconcerting intensity. Fear, cold and immediate, paralyzed her for a second. He was a stranger, a potentially dangerous man, and she was alone with him. But then he spoke, and his voice was not threatening. It was hoarse, but gentle. "You slept on the sofa," he said, his tone a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "Why?" Sofia sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Someone had to watch you," she replied, her nurse's instincts kicking in. "You lost a lot of blood. I needed to make sure your fever didn't spike." He continued to look at her as if she were a creature from another planet, a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You're not afraid of me?" "Should I be?" she countered, her voice steadier than she felt. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Probably." The first few days fell into a strange, quiet rhythm, a dance of caution and care. Sofia had to go to work. She couldn't afford to miss a shift, and she didn't have a good enough reason to call in sick. Before she left, she would leave him clear, concise instructions on a notepad. Rest. Drink plenty of water. No solid food until tonight. Call me if the bandage bleeds through. And to her surprise, he obeyed. The powerful, imposing man was a model patient, following her orders with a quiet docility that seemed completely at odds with his entire being. When she returned home each evening, exhausted from her own long day of caring for strangers, she would care for him. She would check his temperature, his blood pressure. She would gently remove the old bandages, clean the wound with practiced, professional hands, and apply a fresh dressing. She would make him a light, simple meal: broth, toast, things that were easy to digest. They spoke very little at first. He was reserved, watchful. She was respectful of his privacy, never pushing for information he was clearly unwilling to give. But in the quiet, intimate moments of care, a silent communication began to form. She would see the way his eyes tracked her face as she concentrated on changing his dressing, a look of quiet awe on his face. He would see the way she would sometimes drift off in her chair while reading late at night, and when she woke, she would find a blanket tucked gently around her shoulders. On the third day, she came home from work to a surprise. The apartment was immaculate, cleaner than she had left it, and from the small kitchen came the scent of garlic and herbs. She found Anthony standing at the stove, still moving stiffly, but with a new strength. He was making dinner. "You should be resting," she said, stunned. He turned, and for the first time, she saw a genuine, unguarded smile on his face. It transformed his harsh, severe features, making him look younger, more approachable. "I've been resting for 3 days," he said. "And you work so hard. You take care of everyone." He gestured to the pan on the stove. "Let me do something for you." Sofia was speechless. They ate together at her small kitchen table, and the conversation for the first time flowed easily. He asked about her day at the hospital, not with polite interest, but with a real, focused attention. He listened as she told him about a difficult, frightened elderly patient, and he offered a perspective on fear and dignity that was surprisingly wise and compassionate. "You're more than you seem," she commented, taking a bite of the surprisingly delicious pasta he had made. His smile faded, his expression growing serious. "We all are," he said softly. Later that night, Sofia was woken by a sound from the living room. She got up and found Anthony standing by the window, staring down at the quiet, empty street below. His posture was tense, the relaxed man from dinner gone, replaced by the watchful, dangerous stranger she had first met. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. "I have to leave soon," he said finally, his voice low, his gaze still fixed on the street. "It's not safe for you having me here." Sofia felt a strange, unwelcome pang in her chest. It was a mixture of fear, yes, but also a deep, profound reluctance to see him go. "You're not fully recovered yet," she argued, the nurse in her taking over. Anthony finally turned to look at her, and she saw a genuine conflict in his dark eyes. "I can't risk putting you in more danger." She took a step forward, her own boldness surprising her. "And what if I'm willing to take that risk?" The question hung in the air between them, charged with a new, unspoken intimacy. Before either of them could say another word, a phone on the coffee table, his phone which had been turned off and untouched for days, vibrated silently, the screen lighting up the dark room. He glanced at it. His face went pale. "They've found me." "Who found you?" Sofia asked, her voice a sharp whisper as fear, cold and immediate, shot through her. Anthony was already moving, his earlier stillness replaced by a swift, economical efficiency. He grabbed the burner phone from the table, his gaze sweeping the room as if assessing threats. "People who can't see you with me," he answered, his voice tight with a new, dangerous urgency. He started for the door, but Sofia moved faster, blocking his path. "Anthony, stop!" she said, her voice firm, demanding. "You owe me an explanation. You can't just disappear and leave me wondering if someone is going to come knocking on my door." He stopped, his hand on the doorknob, a look of profound frustration on his face. Frustration not with her, but with himself, with the situation he had dragged her into. "You don't understand?" "Then make me understand," she insisted, and there was a strength in her voice, a fire in her eyes that made him pause. He stared at her for a long, silent moment, a battle warring in his eyes. Then, with a slow, resigned sigh, he relented. "Sit down," he said, his voice heavy. "You deserve the truth." He didn't sit. He paced the small living room as he spoke, a caged predator. "My name is Anthony DeLuca," he began, and the name, spoken aloud in her tiny apartment, seemed to carry an impossible weight. "My family, we have deep roots in this city, business interests." He explained that he had inherited the leadership of his family's organization after his father's death, but that he was trying to change things. He was trying to steer the family toward legitimate businesses, to establish a code of honor, to leave the old ways of violence and brutality behind. "I'm not a good man, Sofia, not by any normal standard," he admitted, his voice raw with a self-awareness that surprised her. "But I am trying to be better than the men who came before me." He told her about the ambush. A rival faction, one that wanted to return to the old ways, had set a trap for him. They wanted him dead, to seize control and plunge the family back into a world of open, bloody warfare. "I barely escaped," he said, his voice dropping. "If you hadn't stopped—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Sofia listened, her world tilting on its axis. A mafia boss. She had saved, stitched up, and cared for a mafia boss on her living room sofa. But as she looked at him, at the tired, haunted man who spoke of honor and trying to be better, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man carrying an impossible weight, a man trying to steer a ship through a storm, just like she had found him. "You should have left me on the side of the road," he said, his voice bitter. "Your life would be simpler." "Simpler isn't always better," she countered softly. She stood up and walked toward him. "Anthony, I don't know anything about your world, but I know a good person when I see one." She hesitated, her own vulnerability a stark, terrifying thing. "And you? You're the first person in a long time who has treated me like I matter. Not as a nurse, not as someone who can be useful. Just like I matter." Her words, so simple, so honest, seemed to strike him with more force than any bullet. He looked at her, his expression one of stunned, profound emotion. He raised his hand, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, his touch as soft as a whisper. "Sofia," he breathed, "you are the best person I have ever met, and that is exactly why I have to go. You deserve a quiet life, a safe life without—" A sharp, heavy knock on the apartment door shattered the moment. They both froze. Instinctively, Anthony moved, placing his body in front of hers, a human shield. His entire demeanor shifted, the gentle, conflicted man vanishing, replaced by the dangerous, authoritative leader. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice a low, commanding growl. "It's me, Don DeLuca," a gruff, familiar voice answered from the other side. "Marco, please open the door. I'm alone." Anthony recognized the voice of his most trusted man. He unlocked the door and opened it carefully. Marco, his large frame filling the doorway, stepped inside, his face a mask of exhaustion and relief. "Grazie a Dio," Marco breathed, his eyes finding Anthony. "You're alive." His gaze then shifted, landing on Sofia, who stood half-hidden behind Anthony. He assessed her quickly, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "And you must be—" "She's the woman who saved my life," Anthony finished, his tone leaving no room for question. A clear, protective claim. Marco nodded at her, a look of genuine, profound respect on his face. "Then I, and the entire DeLuca family, owe you a debt that can never be repaid, Signorina." He turned his urgent gaze back to Anthony. "But we have to go. Now. They're tearing the city apart looking for you." He hesitated, his eyes flicking back to Sofia. "And they know about her." "What do you mean they know about her?" Anthony's voice was dangerously quiet, the calm at the center of a hurricane. Marco looked deeply uncomfortable. "Someone saw her car stop on the road that night, a farmer down the way. He thought it was suspicious, mentioned it to a friend, who mentioned it to a friend." He sighed, the frustration evident on his face. "The point is, the story got back to the wrong people. They have her license plate. They know where she lives. They know where she works." The words struck Sofia with the force of a physical blow. Her legs felt weak, and she swayed slightly. Instantly, Anthony's arm was around her, a steady, solid presence holding her up. "Breathe, Sofia," he commanded softly, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. "I won't let anything happen to you." She looked up at him, at the absolute, unwavering certainty in his dark eyes, and found herself believing him. "But how?" she whispered. "They know everything about me." "You're coming with me," he said, the decision already made, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Until this is resolved." She should have protested. She should have been terrified. A part of her was. But as she looked around her small, safe apartment, she knew it was no longer safe. The moment she had stopped her car in the storm, this life had ended. A new, more dangerous one had begun. "For how long?" she asked, her voice surprisingly practical. Anthony exchanged a look with Marco. "A few days," he said. "A week, maybe. Long enough for me to handle this." Sofia nodded, a strange sense of calm settling over her. "Okay," she said. "I need to call the hospital. Tell them I have a family emergency." As she walked to the other room to make the call, her movements calm and composed, Anthony watched her with a look of growing admiration. Marco moved to his side. "She's different," he murmured, his gaze following Sofia. "Not what I expected." "I know," Anthony replied, his voice a low, soft rumble. "You're getting attached, boss," Marco warned gently, his tone that of a trusted, lifelong friend, not a subordinate. Anthony didn't deny it. "I know that too," he admitted, and the raw vulnerability in his voice was something Marco had not heard in years. They left through the back of the building, slipping into a discreet black SUV that was waiting in the alley. As they pulled away, Sofia looked back at her small apartment building, at the life she was leaving behind, and felt a pang of loss, but also a strange, thrilling sense of anticipation. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice quiet in the tense silence of the car. "To a safe place," Marco answered from the front seat, "a private estate outside the city." But when they arrived, after a long drive through winding country roads, it wasn't the dark, foreboding fortress Sofia had imagined. The SUV passed through a set of imposing iron gates and drove up a long, tree-lined driveway, stopping in front of an elegant, welcoming country house, its warm lights glowing against the twilight. It was surrounded by manicured gardens and overlooked a serene, mist-covered lake. "It's beautiful," she murmured, stunned. Anthony watched her reaction, a small, sad smile on his face. "It was my mother's," he said, his voice soft with emotion. "The only place she ever found peace." He turned to her, his gaze intense. "I want you to feel safe here, Sofia." Marco helped them get settled, then departed to handle the situation in the city, leaving them alone in the vast, quiet house. The tension of the past few days, the adrenaline, the fear, it all hit Sofia at once. She sank onto a plush sofa in the grand living room, the reality of her situation finally crashing down on her. Tears she had been holding back for days began to stream silently down her face. Anthony sat down beside her, not speaking, just being there. Hesitantly, as if unsure of his right to offer comfort, he reached out and pulled her into his embrace. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her hair, his voice thick with a guilt that was almost a physical presence. "For all of this, for walking into your life and turning it upside down." "Don't be," she mumbled into his chest, her voice muffled by his shirt. She pulled back slightly to look him in the eye. "I chose to help you. I'd choose it again." Something shifted between them in that moment. The lines of protector and protected, of patient and nurse, blurred into something new, something deeper. He looked at her tear-streaked face, at the fierce, unwavering loyalty in her eyes, and he leaned in. He was going to kiss her. But at the last second, he stopped, his self-control winning a hard-fought battle. "You must be exhausted," he said, his voice a little rough. "Let me show you to your room." He led her up the grand staircase to a beautiful, airy room with a balcony overlooking the lake. As he was about to leave, she reached out and caught his hand. "Anthony?" she said. He stopped, turning to face her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for protecting me." He squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing against her skin. "Always," he promised. Sofia woke to the scent of freshly brewed coffee and bacon. For a disoriented moment, she forgot where she was, the unfamiliar softness of the bed and the quiet of the countryside confusing her senses. Then, the memories of the past week rushed back. The storm, the wound, the escape. She slipped out of bed and followed the aroma downstairs to a large, sun-drenched kitchen. She found Anthony at a massive, professional-grade stove, expertly flipping pancakes in a pan. He was more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a pair of worn jeans and a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. His hair was slightly disheveled, and a faint stubble shadowed his strong jaw. He looked less like a feared Mafia boss and more like a man at home. He saw her standing in the doorway, and a slow, easy smile spread across his face. "Good morning," he said. "Did you sleep well?" She couldn't help but smile back. "Better than I expected, considering." He gestured with his spatula to a mug of coffee he had already poured for her. "I hope you like pancakes. A word of warning, they're not as good as my Nona used to make." The days at the country house fell into an unexpectedly sweet and peaceful rhythm. It was a strange suspended reality, a bubble of tranquility in the midst of a storm. During the day, Anthony was in constant contact with Marco, managing the escalating situation in the city from a distance. Sofia would watch him, impressed by the way he commanded absolute respect and loyalty through the phone. He was a master strategist, navigating complex conflicts with a sharp intelligence and a surprising preference for negotiation over violence. "You're really good at this," she commented one afternoon, as she watched him calmly diffuse a tense situation with a rival faction. "Leading, I mean." Anthony looked up from his phone, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He wasn't used to compliments. "My father led with fear," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I find loyalty to be a more sustainable business model." In the evenings, they would leave the world behind. They cooked dinner together, their movements a comfortable, easy dance in the large kitchen. They watched old black-and-white movies in the cozy library, and they talked, for hours. Sofia told him about her parents, who had died in a plane crash when she was a teenager, and how their memory had fueled her desire to care for people, to ease the kind of pain she had felt so acutely. Anthony, in turn, shared pieces of his own guarded past. He spoke of his gentle, loving mother, who had died of cancer when he was young, and of his hard, emotionally distant father, who had never known how to love his son, only how to train his heir. He spoke of the crushing weight of a legacy he had never asked for. One night, after a bottle of good red wine and a long, laughter-filled dinner, they were sitting on the plush sofa in front of a crackling fire. The space between them felt dangerously small, charged with an unspoken, simmering tension. "Can I ask you a question?" Sofia asked, her courage bolstered by the wine. "Always," he replied, his gaze soft in the firelight. "Why have you never married? Started a family of your own?" Anthony's expression grew serious. He stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "In my world, Sofia, a family isn't a joy. It's a vulnerability. It's a weakness that your enemies can and will use against you." He paused, his voice dropping. "Besides," he added, a note of old, deep-seated loneliness in his tone, "I never found anyone who made me want to take that risk." The word "never" hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. "And now?" she whispered, her heart pounding. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes full of an emotion so intense it made her tremble. "Now," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. "I'm starting to understand what my mother saw in my father. Why she stayed with him, despite everything. Why she believed he was worth the risk." He lifted his hand, his fingers gently, tentatively, tracing the line of her cheek. "Sofia," he began, his voice thick with a desire he could no longer hide. But before he could say another word, his phone, which he had left on the mantel, rang, the sharp, intrusive sound shattering the intimate moment. Reality, cold and unwelcome, crashed back in. It was Marco. And it was urgent, Anthony answered, and Sofia watched his expression shift, first to relief, then to a deep, troubled concern. He hung up the phone. "Marco managed to negotiate a truce," he said, his voice strained. "The rival faction has agreed to a sit-down, a peace talk." Sofia should have been relieved. This was what they wanted. but a strange, cold dread filled her. "That's good, right?" He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. "It's the best possible outcome. A peaceful resolution." "But," she prompted. He looked at her, and his eyes were full of a profound, heartbreaking regret. "But it means that in a few days, if all goes well, you can go back to your life. You'll be safe again." She realized with a sickening certainty that she didn't want to go back. Not anymore. "And you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Where will you go?" He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. He would go back to his world, the world where she could never truly belong. "We still have a few days," he said finally, and his voice was both a promise and a farewell. The news of the impending peace talk cast a bittersweet shadow over their secluded paradise. They were living on borrowed time, and they both knew it. A silent, unspoken agreement passed between them. They would make every remaining moment count. Sophia woke the next morning to find Anthony standing on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in his hands, watching the sunrise paint the lake in hues of pink and gold. She joined him, bringing her own cup, and they stood side by side in a comfortable silence, simply existing together. "In another world," Anthony said finally, his voice a low murmur. "In another life. Maybe I could have met you in a coffee shop. Maybe we could have had—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "Something normal?" Sophia supplied softly. He nodded, a sad, wistful look in his eyes. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers twining with his. "Who says I want normal?" she whispered. That was the only permission he needed. They spent the day in a whirlwind of stolen moments, a desperate attempt to cram a lifetime of normal into a single day. He took her exploring the vast estate, showing her the secret gardens his mother had planted, a hidden waterfall, an old weathered swing hanging from the branch of a massive oak tree. "My mother used to sit here when she needed to think," he shared, his voice soft with memory. "Or to escape." Sophia sat on the swing, and Anthony pushed her gently, a real, unguarded smile on his face as she laughed, the sound like music in the quiet woods. "You should smile more," she said, looking at him over her shoulder. "It suits you." They had a picnic by the lake, feasting on bread, cheese, and wine from the estate's cellar. He tried to teach her a few words in Italian. She butchered the pronunciation so badly that he laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that made her heart ache with a love so fierce it was painful. "You're terrible at this," he teased, and she threw a grape at him. "I'm a nurse, not a linguist," she retorted, laughing with him. Later, they took a small rowboat out onto the lake. In the middle of the calm, clear water, surrounded by nothing but the sky and the trees, the world of danger and mafia politics felt a million miles away. He pulled her closer, and as they floated in the quiet stillness, the world simply disappeared. That evening after dinner, he put a record on the old turntable in the library, a soft, romantic Italian ballad. "Dance with me?" he asked, holding out his hand. Sophia was barefoot, wearing a simple sundress, her hair loose around her shoulders. To him, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. She placed her hand in his, and he pulled her close. They danced slowly in the center of the room, illuminated only by the flickering firelight. "Sophia," he murmured, his face buried in her hair, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer contain. "I shouldn't." "Then don't," she whispered back, her arms tightening around his neck. "But I want you to." That was all it took. The last of his resistance crumbled. He kissed her, not with the gentle tenderness of before, but with a deep, desperate hunger, as if he were trying to memorize the taste of her, the feel of her, for a lifetime of lonely nights ahead. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, the truth of their feelings laid bare. "Stay with me," he pleaded, his voice a raw, vulnerable whisper. Tonight. Tomorrow. For as long as we have. She answered him by pulling his mouth back to hers. The next morning was perfect. They woke tangled in the sheets, the sunlight streaming through the windows. They had coffee in bed, their laughter echoing in the quiet room. It was a perfect, beautiful illusion of a normal life. And then the phone rang. It was Marco. The meeting is set. Tonight. They want to get this over with quickly. Anthony closed his eyes, holding Sofia tighter, trying to brand the feeling of her in his arms into his memory. I understand, he said, his voice strained. I'll be there. He hung up and looked at her, the love in his eyes now mixed with a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. I have to go to the city, he said, for the meeting. Sofia nodded, her own heart aching, trying to be brave for him. I know. You'll stay here, he continued, his voice firm, protective. Where it's safe. Marco has left 2 of my most trusted men guarding the property. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her. What if something goes wrong? She whispered, the fear she had been holding back finally creeping into her voice. He sat up beside her, taking her face in his hands. It won't, he said, trying to convince himself as much as her. I promise I'll come back to you. But they both knew it was a promise that might be beyond his power to keep. Sofia watched from the porch as Anthony's car disappeared down the long gravel driveway, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. The silence that descended in his absence was immediate and absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. The house, which had felt like a warm, vibrant sanctuary just hours before, was now just a big, empty building. She spent the day in a state of anxious limbo, a prisoner of her own thoughts. She tried to read, but the words on the page were a meaningless jumble. She tried to watch a movie, but she couldn't focus on the plot. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to stretch for an eternity. She kept her phone clutched in her hand, her stomach twisting into a knot every time she thought it vibrated, her heart sinking with disappointment when she saw the screen remain dark. As afternoon bled into evening, her anxiety grew into a gnawing, physical ache. She paced the length of the house, from the kitchen where he had made her pancakes, to the library where they had danced, to the bedroom where they had made love. His ghost was everywhere. She touched the book he had left on his nightstand, his place marked with a folded corner. She picked up the shirt he had worn that morning, still draped over the back of a chair, and brought it to her face, inhaling the faint, lingering scent of him. This is insane, she whispered to the empty room. You've known him for a week. But her heart didn't care about logic or timelines. It only knew that the man it had chosen was in danger, and she was utterly, completely helpless. One of the guards, a large, quiet man named Tommaso, brought her a tray with a light dinner on it. Don DeLuca gave strict orders that we were to ensure you ate, Signorina, he said, his voice gentle despite his intimidating size. She barely had the appetite to touch it. Have you heard anything? She asked, her voice small, hopeful. Do you know where he is? If the meeting is going well? Tommaso hesitated, his expression sympathetic. I have no updates, Signorina. My orders are to stay here and protect you. He saw the look of despair on her face and added, his voice softening, But I have known Don DeLuca for 10 years. He is a man of his word. He always keeps his promises. At 10 o'clock, her phone finally rang. It was an unknown number. Her heart leaped into her throat as she answered. Hello? Signorina Collins? It was Marco. She recognized his gruff voice instantly. Marco! Yes. Where's Anthony? Is he okay? The questions tumbled out of her in a frantic rush. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that stretched for an agonizing eternity. There were complications, Marco said finally, his voice strained. Sofia's world tilted. Complications? What happened? Is he hurt? The meeting wasn't what we thought, Marco explained, his voice heavy. It was a trap. But Don DeLuca, he's a master negotiator. He turned the tables on them, even under threat. He got a deal. A wave of dizzying relief washed over her. So he's okay? He's safe? Yes, Marco confirmed. He's safe, but… Another pause. The terms of the deal are complicated. He needs to stay in the city for a few days to finalize the transitions. When can he come back? Sofia asked, hating the desperate, needy sound of her own voice. Marco hesitated, and in that hesitation, she knew the answer before he even said it. Signorina, he asked me to arrange for you to be taken home in the morning. Your life is no longer in danger. You can go back to normal now. The words were a death sentence. Can I talk to him? She pleaded. He's in meetings, Marco said, his voice full of a regret he couldn't quite hide. He said you would understand. And she did. She understood perfectly. This was his way of protecting her, by cutting her out of his life completely. It was the most selfless and the most painful thing he could have done. I see, she whispered, her voice breaking. After she hung up, she sank onto the floor, the silent tears finally breaking free. Tommaso, who had overheard everything from the hallway, entered the room, his expression one of deep, respectful sorrow. Signorina, he said quietly. May I say something? She looked up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Of course. In the 10 years I have worked for him, Tommaso said, his voice a low, earnest rumble, I have never seen Don DeLuca look at anyone the way he looks at you. He met her gaze, his own eyes full of a fierce loyalty. Whatever he is doing it because he loves you, not because he doesn't. The drive back to the city the next morning was a silent, gray funeral procession for a life she had barely had a chance to live. Sofia stared out the window, the vibrant colors of the countryside seeming to mock the dull, aching emptiness in her chest. Her apartment was exactly as she had left it, a time capsule of a person she no longer was. She walked through the small, familiar rooms, touching the surfaces of her old life. The worn armchair where she read her books, the small kitchen table where she ate her solitary meals. It all felt foreign now, like a stranger's home. The silence, which had once been a comfort, was now a hollow, echoing void, amplifying the absence of the man who had filled it so completely. His ghost was everywhere. The sofa where he had lain, bleeding and vulnerable. The kitchen where he had smiled and made her dinner. The bed where he had slept, a silent guardian in the night. Every corner of her small, simple world was now haunted by the memory of his extraordinary presence. She went back to work at the hospital, desperate to lose herself in the familiar, demanding routine. She threw herself into her job, caring for her patients with a fierce, focused energy, trying to outrun the memories. Her colleagues noticed a change in her. She was quieter, more reserved, a new, sad maturity in her eyes. You seem tired, one of them commented kindly. Family emergency? Something like that, Sofia had replied, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. The days bled into a week, then 2. The city was quiet. She scanned the news every night, searching for any mention of the DeLuca family, but there was nothing. Just a few vague business articles about corporate restructuring and leadership changes in a handful of investment firms she now knew were his. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. She looked at her phone 1,000 times a day, her heart leaping at every notification, only to sink again when she saw it wasn't him. She told herself it was for the best. He had given her life back. She was safe. She should be grateful. But all she felt was a profound, soul-deep ache. How do you go back to a black and white world after you've seen it in color? One evening, returning home late from another long shift, she saw it. A sleek black car, parked discreetly across the street from her building. Her heart stopped. Marco got out of the driver's side. She froze on the sidewalk, her breath catching in her throat as he walked toward her. "Signorina Collins," he said, his voice a low, respectful greeting. "Marco," she breathed. "What? Why are you here?" He didn't answer. He simply held out a thick, cream-colored envelope. "From Don DeLuca," he said. Her hands trembled as she took it. Inside was a single heavy key and a small, crisp card with an address printed on it. And underneath, a few lines written in a strong, elegant, achingly familiar handwriting. "If you still want to see me, knowing who I am, knowing what my world entails, come. The choice is yours. It will always be yours. A." She looked up at Marco, her mind reeling. "What is this? Where is this address?" "It's an apartment," he explained. "He bought it for you. Even if you choose never to see him again, it's yours. It's safe, in a better neighborhood, with discreet, 24/7 security. He wanted to make sure you were protected, no matter what." Tears of frustration and a fierce, desperate love welled in her eyes. "He can't just buy me apartments," she said, her voice choked with emotion. A sad, knowing smile touched Marco's lips. "He can, and he did," he said gently. "But it's not about the apartment, Signorina. It's about giving you the choice. He didn't want to pressure you, to force you to decide with him standing right there. You have a good life here, a career, safety. He won't be the one to take that away from you." Sofia stared at the key in her hand. The key to a life she didn't know if she wanted, offered by the only man she knew she did. "If I go to this address?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Will he be there?" Marco shrugged, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he said honestly. "He gave me this envelope 3 days ago. He told me to give it to you when I felt the time was right." Sofia took a deep, shuddering breath, her decision made in the space of a single, frantic heartbeat. "The address," she said, her gaze firm, resolute. "Is it far?" 20 minutes from here," he replied. "Can you take me there?" she asked. "Now?" A slow, genuine smile spread across Marco's face. "It would be my honor, Signorina." The building was elegant but discreet, a modern glass and steel structure in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, with a view overlooking a quiet, tree-lined park. It was a world away from her own small, walk-up apartment. Marco escorted her to the penthouse elevator, handed her a small security fob, and then, with a respectful nod, retreated. "He will know you are here," was all he said. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the elevator ascended in a smooth, silent rush. When the doors opened, they opened directly into a private foyer. There was only one door. She took a deep breath and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy click. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was breathtaking. It was a vast, open-concept space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. It was decorated with impeccable taste. Modern, minimalist furniture, a few carefully chosen pieces of abstract art, a grand piano in one corner. But it was also empty. It was a beautiful, perfect space that was waiting for a life to be lived in it. And standing by the far window, a dark silhouette against the glittering city lights, was Anthony. He turned as he heard her enter, his body going still. For a long, silent moment, they just stared at each other across the vast expanse of the room. The unspoken questions, the heartache, the longing, all hanging in the air between them. "You came," he said finally, his voice a low, rough whisper, thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. "You gave me a key," she replied, her own voice surprisingly steady as she closed the door behind her. "What did you expect me to do?" They remained separated by the length of the room, an invisible line drawn between his world and hers. Sophia, I need you to understand, he began, his voice earnest, pained. I sent you away because I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought you deserved better than— Stop, she interrupted, and she finally began to move, crossing the room toward him, her steps sure and deliberate. Stop telling me what I deserve. I get to decide that. Not you. She stopped directly in front of him, so close she could see the conflict, the hope, the raw love warring in his dark eyes. And I've decided, she said, her voice a soft but unwavering declaration, that I want you, all of you, your scary world, your secrets, your dangers. She reached up, her hand gently touching his cheek. Everything. With a low groan that came from the depths of his soul, he pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him as if he could absorb her into himself, as if she were oxygen and he had been suffocating for weeks. Are you sure? He murmured into her hair, his voice ragged. Because once you choose this, once you choose me, there's no easy way back. She pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. I'm sure, she whispered. The only question is, do you want me? I love you, he answered without a moment's hesitation, the words a raw, profound confession. I love you in a way I didn't know was possible. You make me want to be better, to do better. He paused, a new seriousness entering his eyes. But loving you also means protecting you, even from me. She frowned, a flicker of the old fear returning. What do you mean? There have to be conditions, he said, his tone gentle but firm. For your safety. For our future. What conditions? You live here, he said, gesturing to the beautiful empty apartment. Where I know you're secure. You let me teach you about my world, not to scare you, but to prepare you. So you're never caught off guard again. He hesitated, his expression growing serious. And there's someone you need to meet. Who? Sophia asked, her heart beginning to pound again. Anthony took a deep breath. My family, he said. What's left of it? My nonna, my grandmother. She's alive. She lives in a private home with full-time care. She is the heart of this family. And if you're going to be in my life, she has to meet you. She has to give us her blessing. Sophia felt a wave of nervousness. The matriarch of the DeLuca family. And what if she doesn't like me? A slow, tender smile touched Anthony's lips. Impossible, he said softly. But he grew serious again. You need to be prepared. She's old school. She has expectations. She will test you. Sophia swallowed hard. When? Tomorrow, he said. If you're ready. She wasn't, not even close. But she looked into the eyes of the man she loved, the man who was willing to change his entire world for her, and she knew there was only one answer she could give. I'll be ready. The house was a stately, old-world mansion in the city's most historic neighborhood, a fortress of brick and ivy that had been in the DeLuca family for generations. Anthony held Sophia's hand as they walked up the stone path, his grip firm, reassuring. Remember, he whispered as they reached the heavy oak door. Just be yourself. She respects honesty above all else, and she can smell fear a mile away. A severe-looking Italian housekeeper in a crisp black uniform opened the door and led them through a series of quiet, art-filled rooms to a sun-drenched solarium overlooking a magnificent rose garden. And there, sitting in a high-backed velvet armchair like a queen on her throne, was Nonna Maria. She was a tiny woman, her frame made fragile by her 80-something years, but she possessed an aura of indomitable power. Her hair was a cloud of snow white. Her dress was simple but elegant, and her eyes, the same dark, intelligent eyes as her grandson, were as sharp and piercing as a hawk's. Nonna, Anthony said, his voice full of a genuine, boyish affection that Sofia had never heard before. He bent down and kissed her on both cheeks. Ti presento Sofia. Nonna Maria's gaze settled on Sofia, and it was like being weighed and measured on a cosmic scale. She didn't smile. "So," she said, her voice a low, raspy contralto, "you are the nurse who saved my grandson's foolish life." The test began subtly. Over small cups of strong espresso, Nonna Maria interrogated Sofia, her questions veiled as polite conversation. She asked about Sofia's family, her upbringing, her values. She asked why she had chosen a life of nursing. Sofia answered every question with a simple, unadorned honesty. She spoke of losing her parents, of her desire to ease the suffering of others because she knew what it was to suffer. She spoke of her belief in compassion, in kindness, in the simple, profound act of caring for another human being. Nonna Maria listened, her expression unreadable, nodding occasionally. "Caring is a noble calling," she said finally, a note of approval in her voice. "But to care for a DeLuca?" She paused, her sharp eyes fixing on Sofia. "It requires more than kindness. It requires strength. It requires courage." Sofia met the old woman's gaze without flinching. "Then it's a good thing I have both," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. For the first time, a small, genuine smile touched Nonna Maria's lips. They had lunch together, and the old woman began to tell stories. She spoke of Anthony's mother, another outsider who had married into the family. She spoke of how she had earned the family's respect not through submission, but through her unwavering dignity, her fierce loyalty, and her genuine love for her husband. As she spoke, Sofia realized Nonna Maria wasn't just telling stories. She was giving her a roadmap. After lunch, Nonna Maria dismissed her grandson. "Anthony, go. I wish to speak with the girl alone." Anthony hesitated, a flicker of concern in his eyes, but Sofia gave him a small, reassuring nod. In the privacy of the rose garden, the old woman's demeanor became serious. "My grandson loves you," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "I can see it in his eyes. It is the way his nonno used to look at me." Tears pricked Sofia's eyes. "I love him too." "I know," Nonna Maria said, "and that is why I will tell you the truth." She took a deep, steadying breath. "Anthony is trying to leave this life, completely. He wants to turn the family businesses fully legitimate, to hand over the other operations to his most loyal men, and to walk away. For you." Sofia was stunned. He didn't tell me. "Because he does not want you to feel responsible for his choice," the old woman explained. "But you must know what you are asking of him. It will not be easy. There will be resistance. There will be danger. You must be prepared for the consequences." Sofia returned to the living room, her mind reeling. Anthony saw the look on her face immediately. "What did my nonna say to you?" Before she could answer, his phone rang. It was Marco. Anthony's face darkened as he listened. "When?" he asked, his voice tight. A pause. "I understand. I'm on my way." He hung up and looked at Sofia, his expression a mixture of regret and grim resolve. "I have to go," he said. "Something's happened." "Is it dangerous?" she asked, her heart pounding. He hesitated, clearly not wanting to lie to her. "It could be," he admitted. "One of my father's old associates is challenging my recent decisions." Sofia stood up, her own decision made in an instant. "Then I'm going with you." "Sofia, no." "You said you were going to teach me about your world," she interrupted, her voice firm. "Start now. Don't shut me out." He looked at her, at the fierce, unwavering determination in her eyes, and he saw not a liability, but a partner, a queen. He finally gave a slow, reluctant nod. "All right," he said, "but you stay by my side, always." The meeting was held at Il Santuario, a dimly lit, old-school Italian restaurant that was one of the DeLuca family's oldest holdings. It was a place of power, a place where deals were made and fates were decided over plates of pasta and glasses of red wine. As they entered, Sofia felt the familiar weight of dozens of eyes turning toward them. The restaurant, though closed to the public, was filled with men in dark suits, their conversations dropping to a respectful hush as Anthony walked in. But when they saw Sofia at his side, the silence was filled with a new, sharp curiosity and a barely concealed disapproval. At a long table in the back of the room sat 5 older men, the last vestiges of his father's regime. Their leader, a man named Salvatore, with a face like a bulldog and a reputation for brutality, did not stand when Anthony approached. "Don DeLuca," Salvatore said, his voice a low, gravelly sneer. "You bring a civilian to family business? Have you lost your mind?" Anthony didn't flinch. He pulled out a chair for Sofia, waiting until she was seated before taking his own place at the head of the table. "I bring the woman who saved my life," he replied, his voice calm, his authority absolute. "She stays." The meeting was a masterclass in controlled power. Sofia watched, fascinated, as Anthony commanded the room. He was transformed here. The gentle, haunted man she knew was gone, replaced by a leader with a spine of steel and an intellect as sharp as a razor. Salvatore and his cronies challenged Anthony's recent decisions, his move toward legitimacy, his soft approach. "You are diluting our power, our legacy," Salvatore argued, his fist hitting the table. "You are making us weak." Anthony didn't raise his voice. He countered every argument with cold, hard logic. He presented profit and loss statements, risk assessments, projections. "I am making us sustainable," he said, his voice cutting through the bluster. "The world has changed, Salvatore. The old ways lead to only 2 places, a prison cell or a grave. We either evolve or we become extinct." When Salvatore threatened to handle problems the old-fashioned way, Anthony's response was swift and chilling. "Those days are over," he said, his eyes like chips of ice. "Under my leadership, we find civilized solutions. Or," he paused, letting the threat hang in the air, "you can find new leadership." The silence that followed was absolute. The challenge had been made. The line had been drawn. And everyone in the room knew who held the real power. The meeting ended with a tense, grudging agreement. Salvatore and his men had been outmaneuvered, their bluster defeated by Anthony's quiet, unyielding logic. As they were leaving, Salvatore stopped beside Sofia's chair. "Signorina," he said, his voice a low, grudging murmur. "A word." Anthony tensed, but Sofia gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Salvatore studied her, his old, calculating eyes assessing her. "You have changed him," he said. The words not an accusation, but a simple statement of fact. "In a few months, you have done what years of our counsel could not." "I didn't try to change him," Sofia replied, her voice steady. "I know," Salvatore said, a hint of something that might have been respect in his tone. "And that is why it worked." He let out a long, weary sigh. "Take care of him. He is more precious to this family than he understands, and he is more vulnerable now than he has ever been." It was a warning, a passing of the torch, in a way. "I will protect him, too," Sofia said, her voice quiet but firm. "In my own way." Salvatore nodded once, then turned and left. In the car on the way back to the apartment, Sofia was quiet, processing everything she had seen. "Are you all right?" Anthony asked, his voice full of a concern that touched her deeply. "Was I right to bring you?" She reached out and took his hand, her fingers twining with his. "Yes," she said. "You were. Now I understand. The weight you carry, the choices you have to make." She squeezed his hand. "Your Nonna told me," she said softly. About you wanting to leave this life. For me. He sighed, knowing this conversation was inevitable. I was waiting for the right time to tell you. Why? She asked, her voice a gentle whisper. Why would you give all this up? He turned to look at her, his love for her a raw, tangible thing in the confines of the car. Because I want to wake up every morning without the fear of losing you, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. I want to build a real life with you. Marriage, maybe children, growing old together. And I can't do that while this life has its claws in me. Before Sofia could respond, before she could tell him that a life with him was all she wanted, no matter the world it came with, a violent explosion ripped through the night, shattering the windows of the car and throwing them violently against their seats. The world exploded into a maelstrom of shattering glass and shrieking metal. The force of the blast threw Sofia forward, her head hitting the dashboard with a sickening thud. Her ears rang, the air thick with the acrid smell of smoke and burnt rubber. For a moment, there was only a disoriented, ringing silence. Sofia! Anthony's voice, raw and frantic, cut through the haze. She felt his hands on her, urgent, checking, assessing. Sofia, talk to me. Are you hurt? She groaned, her head pounding. I'm okay, she managed to say, her voice raspy. You? I'm fine, he growled, though she could see a trickle of blood running from a cut on his forehead. He was already moving, his mind sharp and clear in the chaos. It was a car bomb, small, a warning, not an assassination attempt. Marco's car, which had been following a discreet distance behind, screeched to a halt beside them. Marco and another man were out in an instant, guns drawn, their faces grim. Get them out of here, Marco yelled, pulling open Anthony's door. Now! They were hustled into the back of Marco's car and sped away, leaving the smoldering wreckage behind. They didn't go back to the penthouse. They went to another, smaller, more anonymous safe apartment that Sofia had never seen before. Inside, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a trembling, bone-deep shock. Anthony was pacing the room like a caged tiger, his fury not directed at his enemies, but at himself. I never should have brought you, he said, his voice a low, self-loathing snarl. I put you in that car. I put you in the line of fire. I almost got you killed. Sofia, whose hands were still shaking, walked to the small bathroom and came back with a damp cloth. She stood in front of him, blocking his path, and gently began to clean the blood from his forehead. Anthony, look at me, she commanded softly. He finally stopped pacing, his dark eyes filled with a storm of guilt and rage. I knew the risks, she said, her voice firm. I chose to be there, with you. You could have died, he insisted, his voice breaking. But I didn't, she countered. We didn't, and now you need to focus. You need to find out who did this. He closed his eyes, pulling her into a fierce, desperate hug, his arms a steel cage around her. I can't lose you, Sofia, he whispered into her hair. I can't. You won't, she promised, her own arms wrapping around him, holding him together. Marco entered a few minutes later with a preliminary report. It wasn't Salvatore, he said, his face grim. He's old school, but he has honor. He wouldn't break a truce, especially not like this. This was someone else. Someone trying to provoke a war, to make you look like a hypocrite if you respond with violence. The implication was clear. An outside enemy was trying to destabilize the fragile peace. Anthony pulled away from Sofia, his expression hardening. I have to send you away, he said, his voice flat, resolute. Out of the country, somewhere safe until I handle this. Sofia stared at him, her heart sinking. What? No, we just had this conversation. And now a bomb has gone off, he retorted, his fear making him harsh. Be reasonable, Sofia. I am being reasonable, she shot back, her own fear turning to anger. Sending me away makes me a target. It makes me vulnerable and alone. The most reasonable, logical thing to do is to keep me here, with you, where you can actually protect me. Anthony was clearly torn, his love for her warring with his deep-seated instinct to shield her by creating distance. Marco, ever the voice of reason, stepped forward. "With all due respect, Dawn," he said quietly, "she's right. Here, in a secure location, surrounded by our men, she is safest. Alone, even with protection, she is a much easier target to isolate." Anthony closed his eyes, defeated by the undeniable logic of the two people he trusted most. "All right," he conceded, his voice heavy. He looked at Sofia, his eyes full of a new, grim resolve. "But Sofia, I have to do something that could be dangerous, and this time I can't take you with me." "What are you going to do?" she asked, a cold dread creeping up her spine. He exchanged a look with Marco. "I'm going to find out who was behind this," he said. "And I'm going to negotiate with them, on my terms." He paused, the weight of his next words filling the room. "But it means walking into their territory, alone." Sofia grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his suit jacket. "That's suicide! They'll kill you!" "Or," he countered, a faint, humorless smile on his lips, "they'll respect me for showing I'm not afraid, for proving I won't answer violence with more violence." It was an insane, high-stakes gamble, and they all knew it. "When?" she whispered. "Tomorrow night." Tears she had sworn she wouldn't shed pricked her eyes. She fought them back. "Then we have tonight," she said, her voice a mixture of love, fear, and defiance. He pulled her into his arms, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was both urgent and achingly tender. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "No matter what happens, never, ever doubt that." "Come back to me," she whispered, her hands framing his face. "Promise me." "I promise." The next day passed in a state of suspended, agonizing dread. Sofia stood by the window of the safe apartment, watching the sun set over the city, each passing hour a countdown to the moment he would leave. He was scheduled to depart in an hour. She turned and saw him standing in the doorway, dressed in another impeccable dark suit, his posture confident, his face a mask of calm resolve. But she had learned to read the subtle signs of his tension, the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed almost imperceptibly against his side. "Are you scared?" she asked softly. He walked toward her, stopping just inches away. He considered lying, then decided he owed her the truth. "Yes," he admitted, his voice a low murmur, but not of dying. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. "I'm scared of not coming back to you." She leaned into his touch, her own fear a cold knot in her stomach. "Then come back," she said simply. "It's as simple as that." He explained the final details of the plan. The leader of the rival faction, a man named Victor, had agreed to meet him at a neutral location. Anthony would offer him something he wanted: lucrative, legitimate shipping contracts, and control over certain territories the DeLucas were abandoning as they moved toward full legitimacy. It was an offer of peace and prosperity, not a threat. "And if he refuses?" she asked, her voice tight. "Then I improvise," he replied, a faint, humorless smile on his lips. Marco, Tommaso, and 2 other trusted men would accompany him, but they would wait outside. "I have to go in alone," he explained. "It has to look like an act of trust, strategic vulnerability." She understood the logic, but she hated it. When the time finally came for him to leave, she clung to him, her face buried in his chest, memorizing the feel of his arms around her, the scent of him. "I should say something profound," she whispered, her voice muffled by his suit jacket. "Something memorable." "You don't have to say anything," he murmured, his lips brushing against her hair. "But all I can think," she continued, looking up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Please, please come back to me. He kissed her forehead, a long, tender press of his lips. Always, he promised. And then he was gone. The hours that followed were the longest of Sofia's life. She paced the apartment, unable to sit still, unable to read, unable to think. Tommaso, who had been left behind to guard her, tried to make small talk, to distract her, but it was useless. Her entire world had narrowed to the man who had walked into enemy territory alone. Finally, close to midnight, her phone rang. It was him. Sofia. His voice was tense, strained, but it was his voice. He was alive. Relief, so powerful it made her dizzy, washed over her. Anthony, are you okay? Did it work? I'm fine, he said. And yes, it worked. Victor agreed to the terms. The truce is real. You're coming back? She asked, her voice choked with relief. Yes, he replied. But there's one last thing. A final condition. Sofia's heart froze. What is it? Victor wants to meet you, Anthony said, his voice heavy with a reluctance she could feel even through the phone. He said he'll only trust that the deal is permanent if he meets the woman who tamed the DeLuca lion. His words, not mine. He sighed, a sound of deep frustration. I told him no, absolutely not, but he's insisting. He says it's a sign of good faith, a final condition of the peace. Sofia took a deep breath, her mind racing. This was it, the final test. Then he'll meet me, she said, her voice surprisingly calm, resolute. Sofia, no. You don't have to do this. I'll find another way. No, she interrupted, her voice firm. If this is what it takes to guarantee the peace, to guarantee our safety, to guarantee our future, then I'll do it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with a love and an admiration that warmed her to her very soul. How did I ever get so lucky? An hour later, he was back at the apartment, looking exhausted but whole. You don't have to do this, he said again, taking her in his arms. She shook her head, looking up at him with a fierce determination. Yes, she said, I do. They spent the rest of the night planning. The meeting would be in 2 days. It would be in public, at a high-end restaurant, with security from both sides present but discreet. He just wants to meet you, Anthony assured her. A civilized conversation, and then it's over. Then we can finally start our real life. Sofia wanted to believe him, but as she lay in his arms that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that the final hand had not yet been played. Sofia was a bundle of nerves as she got ready for the dinner. She chose her outfit with the care of a diplomat preparing for a summit. A simple, elegant dark blue dress, not too flashy, not too timid. It was a dress that projected a quiet confidence, a message that she was not intimidated, but that she was also not there to make a statement. Anthony watched her, his own anxiety a palpable thing in the room. You look beautiful, he said, his voice a low murmur. And brave, and completely insane for agreeing to this. She managed a small smile. I learned from the best, she replied, adjusting the collar of his shirt. In the car on the way to the restaurant, he held her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a steady, reassuring rhythm. Remember, he said, his voice serious, Victor is a businessman above all else. He's not like the old-school thugs. He respects intelligence. He respects honesty. Just be yourself. That's your greatest weapon. The restaurant was a marvel of understated luxury, a place where the city's most powerful people came to be unseen. The entire top floor had been reserved for their meeting. Victor was already there, waiting at a secluded corner table. He was in his 50s with silver hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that were a cold, calculating gray. He was not physically imposing, but he radiated an aura of sharp, dangerous intelligence. He stood as they approached, a polite, almost charming smile on his face. "Signorina Collins," he said, his voice carrying a faint Slavic accent. "I have heard a great deal about you." "I hope they were good things, Mr. Volkov," Sofia replied, her voice surprisingly calm as she took the hand he offered. The dinner was a masterclass in civilized tension. The conversation flowed easily, but underneath, every word was a carefully calculated move. Victor asked Sofia about her work as a nurse, about her views on loyalty, on family, on honor. She answered every question with the simple, disarming honesty that was her nature. She didn't try to play a part or pretend to be someone she wasn't. And she watched him. She watched the way he observed Anthony, the way he noted the almost imperceptible softening in Anthony's expression whenever he looked at her, the way Anthony was constantly, instinctively attuned to her every need. Finally, after the main course had been cleared, Victor leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I see," he said, more to himself than to them. "You truly love her." Anthony didn't deny it. He simply met the other man's gaze. "More than anything," he replied, his voice quiet but absolute. Victor nodded slowly. "When I was a young man," he said, a rare, genuine sadness in his eyes, "I had a woman like that. A woman who made me want to be a better man. But I chose power instead of her." He sighed, a sound of old, deep regret. "It was the greatest mistake of my life." He looked at Anthony, a flicker of something that looked like respect in his cold eyes. "You are a wiser man than I was, DeLuca, or perhaps just a luckier one." He extended his hand across the table. "We have a deal. Peace between our families." He then turned his gaze to Sofia. "And you? You have my blessing to take this man out of this life. Few ever get the chance. He has earned it." The relief in the room was so thick you could taste it. It was over. But then Victor added, his expression growing serious again. "There is, however, one last piece of business. A loose end. A name you should know." He slid a photograph across the table. It was a grainy security image of a man talking on a payphone. It was Salvatore. "He was the one who orchestrated the car bomb," Victor said, his voice flat, matter of fact. "He was trying to force a war between us, hoping to pick up the pieces after we destroyed each other." Anthony stared at the photo, his jaw tightening, a muscle flexing in his cheek. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Victor confirmed. "He came to me, trying to recruit me against you. I refused, of course. Bad for business." He looked at Anthony. "But he will not give up. As long as he lives with this resentment, neither of you will ever be truly safe." The ride back to the apartment was silent, the air thick with the new, unwelcome knowledge. "Are you going to kill him?" Sofia finally asked, her voice a small, fearful whisper. Anthony looked at her, his expression shocked, almost offended. "God, no," he said, his voice rough. "That's not who I am anymore." He took her hand, his grip tight. "But I am going to neutralize him, permanently." 3 months later, the city was quiet. The peace held. True to his word, Anthony had dealt with Salvatore, but not with a bullet. He had confronted him publicly, in a meeting with the family's most senior members, presenting Victor's irrefutable evidence. He had given his father's old friend 2 choices: a comfortable, permanent, and immediate retirement far from Chicago, or a formal trial by the family's old laws, a death sentence. Salvatore, disgraced and defeated, chose retirement. There was no blood. There was no violence. Just consequences. Sofia stood on the balcony of the penthouse, which now, finally, felt like home. She was watering a small herb garden she had planted, a small patch of green and life in the heart of the glass and steel fortress. She heard the key in the door and smiled. The sound of him coming home was still the best part of her day. He came out onto the balcony, loosening his tie, the stress of the day seeming to melt away as he looked at her. "How was your day?" she asked, kissing him softly. "Productive," he replied, wrapping his arms around her. "The last of the contracts were signed. As of this afternoon, I am no longer officially involved in any questionable businesses." He smiled, a wide, genuine smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "I am now, officially, a boring corporate security consultant." She laughed. "You will never be boring, Anthony DeLuca." That night, during dinner, she noticed he was quiet, a nervous energy about him that was completely out of character. "Is everything okay?" she asked, a flicker of the old fear returning. "Yes. No. Maybe," he stammered, taking a deep breath. "I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, placing it on the table between them. Sofia stared at it, her heart beginning to pound. "Anthony." "Just open it," he encouraged, his voice as nervous as she had ever heard it. Inside was a ring. It was beautiful, a classic, timeless design with a single perfect diamond that caught the light. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious. It was elegant. It was perfect. "I know it's been fast," he began, his voice thick with an emotion he made no attempt to hide. "I know we met under the craziest circumstances imaginable. But Sofia?" He reached across the table and took her hand. "Every single day with you is better than the last. You saved my life that night in the storm, but you did more than that. You saved my soul. You showed me that I could have a real life, not just an existence." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that I was worth saving." Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with happiness. 1,000 times, yes. 6 months later, the wedding was an intimate affair, just as Sofia had wanted. They were married in the gardens of the country estate, under the same old oak tree where he had first pushed her on the swing. Nonna Maria sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Marco stood beside Anthony as his best man. A handful of Sofia's closest friends from the hospital were her bridesmaids. And in a surprising gesture of respect, a single expensive bottle of vodka had arrived from Victor, with a simple one-word note, "Beginnings." As they exchanged their vows, with the sun setting over the lake, they both had tears in their eyes. "You saved me that stormy night," Sofia said, her voice full of a love so deep it was bottomless. "But I didn't realize then that you were also saving me from a life that was safe, but small. You gave me an adventure. You gave me a love I never knew existed. You gave me a home that isn't a place, but a person." Anthony, his own voice thick with emotion, replied, "You showed me that real power is choosing love over fear, that true strength is found in vulnerability, and that the safest place in the world is in your arms." Later that night, they stood on the porch of the house, wrapped in each other's arms, the sound of the party a distant, happy murmur. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly, a question he still sometimes asked, as if he couldn't quite believe his own happiness. "Stopping for a stranger in the storm?" She smiled, leaning her head against his chest. "It was the best decision I ever made," she said. He kissed the top of her head. "Our son is going to have the best mother in the world." "And the best father," she added, placing a hand on her gently swelling belly. "A man who chose love over power, peace over war, and family above all else." They stood there in the quiet of the night, wrapped in a peace they had fought so hard to find. A gentle summer rain began to fall, not a violent tempest, but a soft, cleansing shower. It said that you shouldn't trust strangers, that some storms are a warning to be avoided. But sometimes, a storm brings you exactly what you need. Sometimes, a stranger becomes your home, and sometimes, The craziest decision you ever make is the one that leads you to a love that will last